The sun rose with brutal indifference the morning Sarah Lawson found herself standing in the dusty street of Wichita, Kansas, with nothing but the clothes on her back and the bitter taste of betrayal in her mouth. The year was 1878, and at 20 years old, Sarah had never imagined she would be homeless, abandoned by the very man who had promised her mother on her deathbed that he would care for her daughter as his own. Sarah's fingers trembled as she clutched the small locket containing her mother's portrait, the only possession she had managed to grab before her stepfather had thrown her out. 2 years after her mother's passing, Jeremiah Winters had remarried a woman who despised Sarah's very existence. It had taken less than a month for Sarah to find herself cast out like yesterday's garbage, accused of theft she hadn't committed. The early morning air held a chill despite it being late spring. Wichita was already stirring to life around her merchants opening shops, farm hands heading to work, and saloon doors being swept. Sarah stood frozen, uncertain where to turn. Her mother's family was back east, too far to reach without money. Her friends were few, most having moved on after her mother's death when Jeremiah had first started changing. "Miss, you all right there?" A deep voice startled her from behind. Sarah turned to find a tall man astride a chestnut stallion. The morning sun silhouetted him, making it difficult to see his features clearly, but his broad shoulders and the confident way he sat his horse marked him unmistakably as a cowboy. "I'm fine, thank you," she replied automatically. Years of proper upbringing kicking in, despite her desperate circumstances. The cowboy tilted his head, skepticism evident even beneath the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat. "Forgive me for saying so, but you don't look fine. You look like someone who might need some help." Sarah swallowed hard, pride warring with necessity. I'm afraid I find myself in a difficult situation this morning." "Name's Hayes Nicholson," he said, swinging down from his horse with an easy grace that spoke of years in the saddle. "Most folks just call me Hayes." Standing before her now, Sarah could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 25 or 26, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer sky. His face was clean-shaven, unusual for a cowboy, which made him appear even more youthful despite the weathered lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often. "Sarah Lawson," she replied, extending her hand as her mother had taught her. Instead of shaking it, Hayes took it gently, as though it were something precious. "Miss Lawson, I don't mean to pry, but it seems to me you might be in need of some assistance. I'd be honored to help, if you'd allow it." Sarah hesitated. Her mother had warned her about accepting help from strange men, but there was something in Hayes Nicholson's direct gaze that spoke of honesty. And what choice did she have? The few coins in her pocket wouldn't buy a meal, let alone shelter. "My stepfather threw me out this morning," she said finally, the words tasting like ash. "I have nowhere to go." Hayes nodded, his expression unchanging, asking no questions about why or how such a thing had happened. "There's a respectable boarding house run by Mrs. Abernathy just down the street. I know her well. She might have a room available and perhaps need some help around the place." "I have very little money," Sarah admitted, heat rising to her cheeks. "Let me worry about that for now," Hayes said. "You can pay it back when you're on your feet again." Sarah wanted to refuse, wanted to tell this stranger she didn't need charity, but the rumble in her stomach and the fear of spending the night on the streets silenced her pride. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Nicholson." "Hayes," he corrected with a gentle smile. "And it's not kindness, Miss Lawson, just one person helping another. That's how we survive out here." He offered his arm as properly as any gentleman, and Sarah took it, allowing him to lead her down the street toward whatever future awaited her. She had no idea that this simple act of kindness from a cowboy would change her life forever. Mrs. Abernathy turned out to be a plump, gray-haired widow with shrewd eyes and a surprisingly warm smile. Her boarding house stood 3 stories tall, painted a cheerful yellow that seemed out of place among Wichita's predominantly brown and gray buildings. "Hayes Nicholson! Haven't seen you in town for weeks," she exclaimed as they entered the tidy front parlor. "Your brother was asking after you just yesterday." "Been busy with the spring calving, Mrs. Abernathy," Hayes replied, removing his hat. "This is Miss Sarah Lawson. She's new to town and needs a place to stay. I was hoping you might have a room available." Mrs. Abernathy's sharp eyes took in Sarah's disheveled appearance and the absence of luggage, but she said nothing about it. As it happens, I do have a small room on the third floor. It's modest, but clean. And, Hayes added, Miss Lawson is looking for employment. I thought perhaps you might need some help around the boarding house. The older woman pursed her lips thoughtfully. I could use someone to help with the cooking and cleaning. My arthritis makes it difficult to manage everything on my own these days. She turned to Sarah. Can you cook, girl? Yes, madam, Sarah answered. My mother taught me well. I can also sew and keep accounts. Accounts, you say? Mrs. Abernathy looked impressed. Not many young women with such skills these days. Very well. Room and board, in exchange for help around the place. Plus a small wage once I see your work is satisfactory. How does that sound? Relief flooded through Sarah. That sounds wonderful, Mrs. Abernathy. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. I work my help hard, she warned, though her eyes twinkled. Hayes, would you help the young lady with her things? Hayes cleared his throat. Miss Lawson travels light, Mrs. Abernathy. Understanding dawned in the older woman's eyes. I see. Well, I have some spare necessities you can use until you get settled, Miss Lawson. After settling the financial arrangements which Hayes insisted on handling, despite Sarah's protests, Mrs. Abernathy showed Sarah to her room. It was indeed small, with just enough space for a narrow bed, a washstand, and a small chest of drawers, but the window overlooked a flowering apple tree, and the linen smelled of sunshine and lavender. I'll leave you to rest, Mrs. Abernathy said. Come down when you're ready, and we'll discuss your duties. Alone at last, Sarah sank onto the bed, emotions she had been suppressing all morning, threatening to overwhelm her. The kindness of strangers had given her shelter, but she couldn't help wondering how long it would last. Her stepfather's betrayal had taught her a harsh lesson about depending on others. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Miss Lawson? Hayes's voice came through the wood. I've asked Mrs. Abernathy to prepare a bath for you, and I've taken the liberty of arranging a small advance on your wages so you can purchase whatever necessities you might need. Sarah opened the door, finding Hayes standing respectfully in the hallway, his hat in his hands. Why are you helping me? She asked, the question that had been burning in her mind all morning, finally escaping her lips. Hayes seemed surprised by the directness of her query. When I was 16, my parents died of fever within days of each other, he said quietly. My brother and I would have lost everything if not for the kindness of neighbors who helped us keep our ranch running until we were old enough to manage it ourselves. I'm just passing on the favor. The simplicity of his explanation touched something deep within Sarah. There was no pity in his eyes, no expectation of gratitude or repayment, just the straightforward compassion of someone who understood what it meant to be alone in the world. Thank you, she whispered. Hayes nodded, a small smile touching his lips. I'll be heading back to the ranch now, but I'll check in on you when I'm next in town. If you need anything before then, ask for my brother, Henry. He comes into Wichita most Wednesdays for supplies. With that, he was gone, his boot heels echoing down the wooden stairs, leaving Sarah to wonder about the mysterious cowboy who had given her hope when she needed it most. The next few weeks passed in a blur of hard work and adjustment. Sarah's days began before dawn, helping Mrs. Abernathy prepare breakfast for the boarders, a rotating cast of traveling salesmen, land surveyors, and occasional cowboys passing through. Mornings were spent cleaning rooms and doing laundry, afternoons dedicated to baking bread and preparing the evening meal, and evenings taken up with mending and keeping the boarding house accounts in order. The work was exhausting, but satisfying. For the first time in years, Sarah felt useful, appreciated for her skills rather than merely tolerated. Mrs. Abernathy proved to be a fair employer, gruff but kind, and the other residents treated her with respect. True to his word, Hayes's brother Henry appeared the Wednesday after her arrival, a younger, more talkative version of Hayes with the same blue eyes but a more angular face. So, you're the girl Hayes has been talking about, Henry said with a grin as he enjoyed the pie Sarah had served him. He didn't mention how pretty you are. Sarah felt her cheeks warm. Your brother was very kind to me when I needed help. That's Hayes for you, always picking up strays, Henry said, then winced. Not that you're a stray, Miss Lawson. I didn't mean... It's all right, Sarah assured him, finding his awkwardness endearing. I was rather stray-like when he found me. Henry relaxed, his smile returning. Hayes asked me to make sure you're settling in all right. Our ranch is about 10 miles outside town, the Triple N. Not the biggest spread in Kansas, but we're doing well enough. Triple N? Sarah asked. Nicholson, Nicholson, and Nicholson. It was our father's idea, one N for him, one for Hayes, and one for me. Henry's expression grew nostalgic. Pa had big dreams for that place. Hayes is determined to make them come true. Over the next several weeks, Sarah learned more about the Nicholson brothers through Henry's weekly visits. Their parents had come west from Pennsylvania, establishing the ranch when the boys were just children. After their deaths, Hayes had given up his own dreams of attending university back east to keep the ranch going and ensure Henry could finish school. He never complains, Henry told her one afternoon as they sat on the boarding house porch. But sometimes I catch him looking at those books he used to study history and philosophy and such. Hayes could have been anything he wanted, you know. He's smart as they come. Sarah found herself thinking about Hayes often, wondering when he might return to town as he'd promised. It wasn't until nearly a month after their first meeting that she spotted him again, riding down Main Street one Saturday afternoon, while she was returning from the mercantile with supplies for Mrs. Abernathy. "Miss Lawson," he called, dismounting smoothly and approaching with that same gentle smile she remembered. "You're looking well." It was true. Regular meals and hard work had put color in her cheeks and confidence in her bearing. The simple blue dress she wore, purchased with her first earnings, was modest but becoming. "Mr. Nicholson," she replied, suddenly shy. "It's good to see you again." "Hayes," he reminded her, "and the pleasure is mine. Henry tells me you've become indispensable to Mrs. Abernathy." "Your brother exaggerates," Sarah said, but felt pleased nonetheless. "Mrs. Abernathy has been very good to me." Hayes fell into step beside her. "I was hoping I might call on you properly this evening, if that would be acceptable. Perhaps we could take a walk after dinner?" Sarah found herself nodding before she could consider the wisdom of it. "I would like that." That evening, after the boarders had been fed and the dishes washed, Sarah changed into her best dress, a pale green cotton with white lace at the collar that Mrs. Abernathy had helped her alter from a second-hand purchase. She had just finished pinning her hair when there was a knock at the front door. Hayes stood on the porch, clean-shaven and wearing a pressed shirt, his hat in his hands. "Miss Lawson," he said, a hint of appreciation in his eyes as he took in her appearance. "Sarah," she corrected with a small smile. "If I'm to call you Hayes." His answering smile warmed something inside her that had been cold for too long. They walked through town as the summer evening settled around them, Hayes telling her about the ranch and their cattle operation, Sarah sharing stories of the more colorful boarders who had passed through Mrs. Abernathy's establishment. It was easy, this conversation between them, as though they had known each other for years rather than weeks. "There's a social dance at the church next Saturday," Hayes mentioned as they turned back toward the boarding house. "I was wondering if you might allow me to escort you?" Sarah hesitated. A social dance meant meeting people, questions about her background, her family. "I'm not sure that would be wise," she said finally. Hayes stopped walking, turning to face her. "May I ask why?" Sarah took a deep breath. "The circumstances of my arrival in Wichita, they weren't exactly respectable. If people knew—" "Knew what?" Hayes asked gently. "That your stepfather treated you unfairly? That doesn't reflect on you, Sarah." "It's more complicated than that," she admitted. "My stepfather accused me of stealing from him. He told everyone who would listen that I was a thief, that he'd caught me trying to run off with family heirlooms." The memory still stung. No one believed me when I denied it, not even people who had known me my entire life. Hayes was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "Do you know why I never asked you why your stepfather threw you out?" Sarah shook her head. "Because it didn't matter to me," he said simply. "I saw someone in need, and I wanted to help. Your past is your own business, Sarah. You don't owe anyone explanations." Sarah felt tears threatening. No one had offered her such unconditional acceptance since her mother died. "You're a rare man, Hayes Nicholson." "Not so rare," he disagreed. "Just raised right." He offered his arm again. "Now, about that dance. Would you reconsider?" "I promise to keep any nosy busybodies at bay." Looking into those honest blue eyes, Sarah found herself unable to refuse. All right, but I'll need something to wear. Hayes's face lit up with a smile that made her heart skip. I'm sure Mrs. Abernathy can help with that. And Sarah, thank you. I'm looking forward to it more than you know. The week leading up to the dance passed in a flurry of preparation. True to Hayes's prediction, Mrs. Abernathy was delighted to help, producing a lovely blue silk dress that had belonged to her daughter. She's married and living in St. Louis now, Mrs. Abernathy explained as she pinned the hem. She won't miss it, and it suits you better anyway with your coloring. Sarah had tried to refuse such generosity, but Mrs. Abernathy waved away her protests. Girl, when a good man like Hayes Nicholson shows interest, you don't quibble over a borrowed dress. Those boys had their pick of any young woman in the county. If he set his sights on you, there's a reason. He's just being kind, Sarah insisted, though her heart fluttered at the suggestion there might be more to it. Mrs. Abernathy snorted. I've known that boy since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. Trust me, it's more than kindness. When Saturday evening arrived, Sarah was a bundle of nerves. The blue silk dress fit perfectly after Mrs. Abernathy's alterations, and her hair was arranged in an elegant knot with soft curls framing her face. She hardly recognized herself in the small mirror. The sound of horses outside drew her to the window. Hayes had arrived driving a smart buggy, dressed in what was clearly his Sunday best. The sight of him made her breath catch. Mrs. Abernathy appeared at her door. He's here, and looking like he swallowed a canary when I told him you'd be down shortly. Go on now, don't keep him waiting. Sarah descended the stairs slowly, suddenly self-conscious. When she reached the bottom, Hayes was standing in the entryway, hat in hand. The look on his face as he saw her made every moment of worry worthwhile. You look beautiful, Sarah, he said, his voice slightly rough. Thank you, she replied, equally affected by his appearance. The dark suit emphasized his broad shoulders, and he had trimmed his sun-streaked hair for the occasion. The church was transformed for the evening, lanterns hanging from the rafters and benches pushed against the walls to create a dance floor. It seemed all of Wichita had turned out. From young children running underfoot to elderly couples watching from the sidelines. Hayes Nicholson, about time you showed your face at one of these gatherings, called a portly man as they entered, and with a lovely lady no less. Judge Potter, may I introduce Miss Sarah Lawson, Hayes said formally. Sarah, this is Judge William Potter, one of my father's oldest friends. A pleasure, my dear, the judge said, bowing slightly. Any friend of the Nicholson boys is welcome indeed. So began a whirl of introductions, faces and names blending together as Hayes led her through the crowd. To Sarah's relief, no one asked probing questions about her background, satisfied with the knowledge that she was working for Mrs. Abernathy and had Hayes's evident approval. When the music started, Hayes led her onto the dance floor. I should warn you, I'm not the most graceful dancer, he admitted. Then we're well matched, Sarah laughed. My dancing lessons were interrupted when my mother became ill. But they moved well together, finding a rhythm that suited them both, as the fiddles played a lively tune. Hayes was surprisingly light on his feet for such a tall man, and Sarah remembered the joy of dancing that she had nearly forgotten. As the evening progressed, they took a break to enjoy the refreshments laid out on long tables. Hayes brought her a cup of punch, and they found a quiet corner away from the crowd. Are you enjoying yourself? He asked, looking slightly anxious. More than I thought possible, Sarah admitted. Everyone has been very kind. That's Wichita for you, Hayes said. Folks look out for each other here. He hesitated, then added, I'm glad you came with me tonight, Sarah. These past weeks I've found myself thinking about you often. Sarah's heart quickened. I've thought about you too. The simple confession hung between them, full of possibility. Hayes moved slightly closer, his hand finding hers where it rested on the bench between them. I'd like to call on you regularly if you'd permit it, he said quietly. Get to know you better. Before Sarah could respond, a commotion at the entrance drew everyone's attention. A man had stumbled into the church, clearly intoxicated, his voice raised in anger. Where is she? I know she's here, the man shouted. Sarah froze, ice flooding her veins as she recognized the voice. It was Jeremiah Winters, her stepfather, and he was looking directly at her with hatred in his bloodshot eyes. There you are. You ungrateful thief, he slurred, pointing an accusatory finger. Did you think you could hide in this town forever? The music stopped abruptly. Every eye in the room turned toward Sarah, who felt herself shrinking under the scrutiny. Hayes rose to his feet, stepping protectively in front of her. "Sir, I think you've made a mistake. This is a private gathering." Jeremiah laughed bitterly. "No mistake. That's my stepdaughter, and she stole from me before running away. I've come to take her back to face justice." "That's a lie," Sarah said, finding her voice at last. She stood, her hands trembling, but her voice steady. "I never stole anything. You threw me out because your new wife wanted me gone." "How dare you!" Jeremiah took a menacing step forward, but Judge Potter intervened, placing himself between Jeremiah and the young couple. "Now, see here," the judge said firmly. "This is hardly the place for such accusations. If you have a legitimate complaint, you can file it at my office on Monday morning." "I don't need to wait," Jeremiah snarled. "Everyone back home knows what she did. Ask her about her mother's jewelry that went missing. Ask her about the money that disappeared from my desk." Sarah felt the weight of suspicious glances falling upon her. This was exactly what she had feared her past catching up to her, destroying the new life she had begun to build. "I think you should leave," Hayes said to Jeremiah, his voice dangerously quiet. "Now." "Or what, cowboy?" Jeremiah sneered. "You'll shoot me for telling the truth about your little—" He never finished the sentence. Hayes moved with surprising speed for a man his size, gripping Jeremiah's arm and marching him toward the door. "You're drunk and making a scene at a church function? Either leave voluntarily, or I'll help you leave." Two other men, friends of Hayes, stepped forward to assist. Outnumbered and outmatched, Jeremiah allowed himself to be escorted outside, though not without shouting more accusations over his shoulder. Sarah stood rooted to the spot, humiliation washing over her as whispers spread through the crowd. She had known this happiness couldn't last. It never did. "I should go," she said when Hayes returned, already gathering her shawl. "Sarah, wait," Hayes pleaded. "Don't let him ruin this evening." But it was too late. The magic of the night was shattered. "Everyone is staring, Hayes. They're wondering if what he said is true." "Then let them wonder," Hayes said firmly. "I don't care what anyone thinks. I know you." "Do you?" Sarah challenged, tears threatening. "You know what I've told you, which isn't much. For all you know, I could be exactly what he claims." Hayes's expression softened. "But you're not. I can see it in your eyes, Sarah. You're many things strong, determined, kind, but you're no thief." His unwavering belief in her was almost harder to bear than suspicion would have been. "I need to leave," she whispered. "Please." Hayes nodded reluctantly. "At least, let me take you home." The ride back to the boarding house was silent, tension thick between them. When they arrived, Hayes helped her down from the buggy, his touch gentle despite the strain of the evening. "Sarah," he began, but she shook her head. "Not tonight, Hayes. I can't. I need time to think." He respected her wishes, though the disappointment was clear in his eyes. "I'll come by tomorrow, if that's all right." Sarah couldn't bring herself to refuse him outright, so she nodded before hurrying inside, desperate to escape to the privacy of her room before her composure shattered completely. Once alone, she let the tears come, silent sobs that shook her slender frame. Just when she had started to believe she could build a new life, the past had found her. Jeremiah's appearance couldn't be coincidence. Someone must have mentioned her presence in Wichita, and he had come looking for her. But why? Why couldn't he simply let her go? The answer came to her as she calmed, because Jeremiah Winters was a proud man who couldn't bear to have his lies questioned. If Sarah had simply disappeared, people might have believed his accusations. But if she had established herself elsewhere, living an honest life, it threatened his carefully constructed narrative. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Abernathy's voice came through the door. "Sarah, are you all right, child?" Sarah wiped her tears and opened the door. "I'm sorry about this evening, Mrs. Abernathy. I never meant to bring trouble to your door." The older woman's face showed nothing but concern. "Nonsense. That man was clearly in his cups and looking to cause mischief. Come downstairs and have some tea. You look like you could use it." In the warm kitchen, over steaming cups of chamomile tea, Sarah found herself telling Mrs. Abernathy everything about her mother's illness and death, about her stepfather's gradual change from loving parent to cold stranger after his remarriage, and finally about the false accusations that had led to her banishment. He married Viola Prescott less than a year after Mother died, Sarah explained. She had always resented my mother's place in Jeremiah's life. They had been childhood sweethearts before my mother came to town as the new school teacher. Viola made it clear from the beginning that she considered me an unwelcome reminder of her rival. Mrs. Abernathy listened without interruption, her weathered face showing nothing but compassion. One night, I overheard them arguing about me, Sarah continued. Viola wanted me gone, sent to a boarding school back east, or married off to one of her nephews. Jeremiah was resistant, not out of affection for me, but because of his promise to my mother. The next morning, Viola's diamond earrings were missing, and she immediately accused me of stealing them. "And you didn't, of course," Mrs. Abernathy stated, rather than asked. "Of course not," Sarah confirmed. But it didn't matter. Jeremiah chose to believe his wife. He searched my room and found the earrings in my dresser drawer, though I know they weren't there when I left for breakfast. That was enough for him. He threw me out that very day, telling everyone I was a thief who had betrayed his trust. Mrs. Abernathy reached across the table to pat Sarah's hand. "My dear girl, that's a heavy burden to carry alone, but you should know that people like your stepfather rarely fool everyone for long. The truth has a way of coming out. In the meantime, my reputation is ruined," Sarah said bitterly. "Anyone who was at the dance tonight will be wondering if they can trust me." "Perhaps," Mrs. Abernathy conceded. "Or perhaps they'll wonder why a respectable young woman, working honestly for her living, would be accused by a drunken man, causing a scene at a church function." She gave Sarah a significant look. "Judge Potter is no fool, and neither is Hayes Nicholson. Your stepfather did himself no favors with his behavior tonight." Sarah wished she could share Mrs. Abernathy's confidence, but years of disappointment had taught her to expect the worst. "I should leave Wichita," she said quietly. "Start fresh somewhere Jeremiah can't find me." "And run forever?" Mrs. Abernathy asked gently. "That's no life, Sarah. Besides, there's a certain young rancher who would be heartbroken if you disappeared." The mention of Hayes brought fresh pain. "He deserves better than to be associated with someone under a cloud of suspicion." "Why don't you let Hayes decide what he deserves?" Mrs. Abernathy suggested. "That young man has been looking at you like you hung the moon ever since he brought you here. I doubt your stepfather's ravings will change that." True to his word, Hayes arrived at the boarding house the following morning. Sarah had barely slept, her mind cycling through various scenarios, each more disastrous than the last. By dawn, she had resolved to leave Wichita as soon as she could arrange transportation to the next town. Hayes found her in the kitchen, preparing breakfast for the Sunday boarders, her face pale but composed. "Sarah," he said simply, standing in the doorway with his hat in his hands, "can we talk?" Mrs. Abernathy, who had been helping with the biscuits, made a discreet exit, leaving them alone in the warm, yeast-scented kitchen. "There's nothing to talk about, Hayes," Sarah said, keeping her hands busy with the dough to avoid meeting his eyes. "Last night made it clear that I can't stay in Wichita. I won't have you or Mrs. Abernathy subjected to gossip because of me." "Is that what you're worried about? Gossip?" Hayes stepped closer, his voice incredulous. "Sarah, look at me." Reluctantly, she raised her eyes to his. "I don't care what people say," he told her firmly, "and neither does anyone whose opinion matters. Judge Potter sent word this morning that your stepfather has been escorted to the town limits and advised not to return." Sarah's hands stilled. "He's gone?" "For now, yes, but that's not all." Hayes moved closer, his expression earnest. "The judge mentioned that he remembered a case from about a year ago, a man from your hometown who was passing through Wichita. He was arrested for trying to sell stolen jewelry. When they searched his belongings, they found several items that didn't match the current charges." Hope flickered in Sarah's chest. "What are you saying?" "The judge is sending telegrams to verify, but he believes the man may have been connected to the theft your stepfather accused you of. It seems he worked as a handyman for several households in your area, including your stepfather's." Sarah sank into a chair, her legs suddenly weak. If that's true, then your name will be cleared," Hayes finished for her, taking the seat opposite her. "But Sarah, even if it takes time for the judge to gather evidence, I want you to know that I never doubted you for a second. Not last night, not this morning, not ever." The simple declaration, delivered with such quiet conviction, broke through the walls Sarah had been building around her heart. "Why?" she whispered. "Why do you have such faith in me when you barely know me?" Hayes considered her question seriously. "I think I do know you, Sarah. I know you're honest because I've watched you work tirelessly to repay a debt you never asked for. I know you're kind because I've seen how you treat the elderly boarders with patience when others would be frustrated. I know you're brave because despite everything you've endured, you get up every morning and face the day with dignity." He reached across the table, his calloused hand covering hers. "And I know that from the moment I saw you standing alone in that street, something inside me recognized something in you. I can't explain it better than that." Sarah felt tears gathering in her eyes, but for the first time in a long while, they weren't tears of sadness. "I've been so afraid," she admitted. "Afraid to trust, afraid to hope, afraid to believe that anything good could last." "I understand fear," Hayes said softly. "After my parents died, I was terrified every day, afraid I'd fail my brother, afraid we'd lose the ranch, afraid I wasn't strong enough to handle it all. But I learned that fear doesn't disappear. You just have to find something worth being brave for." His fingers tightened gently around hers. "Stay, Sarah. Give Wichita, give us a chance. Whatever comes, we'll face it together." Looking into Hayes' steady blue eyes, Sarah felt something shift inside her, a loosening of the tight knot of anxiety that had been her constant companion for years. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she wanted to find out. "All right," she said finally. "I'll stay." Hayes' smile was like sunrise breaking through clouds. "That's all I ask for now." Over the following weeks, Hayes' prediction proved accurate. Judge Potter's investigations uncovered evidence that the handyman, one Lucas Dempsey, had indeed been responsible for the thefts at the Winters household and several others. Jeremiah Winters, faced with this revelation and the testimony of neighbors who had also been robbed, was forced to publicly retract his accusations against Sarah. The news reached Wichita in the form of an official letter from the county sheriff back in Sarah's hometown, delivered personally by Judge Potter to the boarding house. Sarah read it with trembling hands, hardly daring to believe that the nightmare was finally over. "Vindication," Mrs. Abernathy declared triumphantly when Sarah showed her the letter. "I never doubted it for a moment." Neither had Hayes, who celebrated the news by taking Sarah on a proper dinner at Wichita's finest restaurant, followed by a moonlit walk along the Arkansas River. As they stood watching the silver-touched water flow past, Hayes turned to Sarah with an expression that made her heart race. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. "I was going to wait, but this seems like the right moment." He handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper. Sarah unwrapped it curiously to find a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, a tiny horse. "It was my mother's," Hayes explained as Sarah gasped in delight. "My father gave it to her when they decided to start the ranch. He added a new charm for every significant moment in their lives together." He took the bracelet gently from her hands and fastened it around her wrist. I hoped it might be the first of many such moments for us." Sarah looked up at him, understanding the significance of such a gift. "Hayes, are you sure? This is a family heirloom." "I've never been more sure of anything," he said simply. "I love you, Sarah Lawson. These past months have shown me what kind of woman you are. Strong, resilient, compassionate. I don't want to rush you, but I need you to know how I feel." Sarah felt as though her heart might burst with joy. The words she had been afraid to acknowledge even to herself now seemed the most natural thing in the world to say. "I love you too, Hayes. I think I have almost from the beginning." His kiss was gentle at first, then deepening as Sarah responded with all the emotion she had kept carefully contained for so long. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Hayes rested his forehead against hers. "Does this mean you'll consider becoming a rancher's wife?" he asked, a hint of vulnerability in his voice. "The Triple N isn't grand, but it's growing. There's a small house my father built for my mother when they first married Henry, and I have been fixing it up. It could be ours, if you wanted." Sarah thought of the boarding house, which had been her sanctuary when she needed it most. She thought of Mrs. Abernathy, who had become like family. And she thought of the life Hayes was offering, not just security, but partnership, respect, and love. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and certain. "Yes, I'll marry you, Hayes Nicholson." His whoop of joy echoed across the water, causing several nearby couples to turn and smile at the evident happiness of the young rancher and his bride-to-be. They were married on a crisp October day, with the Triple N's pastures blazing gold and crimson under the autumn sun. Mrs. Abernathy cried openly during the ceremony, while Henry beamed with pride as he stood as his brother's best man. Judge Potter officiated, his usual judicial gravity softened by the obvious affection he held for the couple. After the simple ceremony, the entire community gathered at the ranch for a celebration that lasted well into the night. There was dancing in the barn, tables groaning with food contributed by neighbors, and enough goodwill to make Sarah's heart overflow with gratitude. "Happy, Mrs. Nicholson?" Hayes asked as they swayed together under the stars, the sounds of fiddles and laughter floating from the brightly lit barn. "Completely," Sarah assured him, nestling closer. "I never imagined I could have this." "This is just the beginning," Hayes promised, his arms tightening around her. "We have our whole lives ahead of us." The small house Hayes had mentioned proved to be a charming two-story structure nestled in a grove of cottonwoods near the main ranch house. Henry had insisted on maintaining his bachelor quarters in the bunkhouse with the ranch hands, giving the newlyweds privacy while remaining close enough to help with the daily running of the ranch. Sarah took to ranch life with determination and adaptability that impressed even the most seasoned cowhands. She learned to ride properly under Hayes's patient tutelage, to tend the kitchen garden that had gone to seed after his mother's death, and to manage the household accounts with the same efficiency she had shown at the boarding house. The winter that followed their wedding was harsh, with blizzards sweeping across the Kansas plains, testing the mettle of even lifelong residents. Hayes and Henry worked tirelessly to protect their herd, sometimes staying out for days to move cattle to sheltered areas and ensure they had access to feed. During one particularly vicious storm, Hayes hadn't returned for 2 nights. Sarah stood at the window of their small house, straining to see through the swirling white curtain of snow, fear gnawing at her stomach. When the door finally burst open, admitting a snow-covered figure she recognized as her husband, Sarah nearly collapsed with relief. "Don't you ever frighten me like that again, Hayes Nicholson," she scolded, even as she helped him remove his frozen outerwear and pushed him toward the fire. "Couldn't be helped," he said through chattering teeth. "Lost track of some yearlings in the north pasture. Had to find them before they froze." "Did you?" Sarah asked, wrapping a quilt around his shoulders and pressing a mug of hot coffee into his hands. Hayes nodded, gratitude in his eyes as the warmth began to seep back into his body. "Found them huddled in that old ravine. They'll make it." He caught her hand as she fussed around him. "I'm all right, Sarah. I promised I'd always come back to you, didn't I?" Sarah nodded, blinking back tears. "I was so worried." "I know," he said gently. "But this is ranching life. Sometimes the land and the weather test us. We endure." And endure they did, through that winter and into the hopeful renewal of spring. As the snow melted and the first green shoots appeared, Sarah discovered she was expecting their first child. Hayes's reaction to the news was everything she could have hoped for. Joy mingled with protective concern, already planning improvements to the house and calculating how they would manage with the new addition to their family. "We should build on another bedroom," he said one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sun set. "And the roof needs to be reinforced before next winter." Sarah laughed, placing her hand over his where it rested protectively on her still flat stomach. "Hayes, we have months before the baby arrives. There's plenty of time." "I want everything to be perfect," he admitted. "Growing up here was the best childhood I could imagine. I want that for our child, too." Sarah understood. Hayes had given her a home when she had nothing. Of course he wanted to provide the same security for their baby. "It will be," she assured him. "Not because the house is perfect or because we are, but because this child will be loved. That's what matters." As her pregnancy progressed, Sarah found herself surrounded by a community of support. Mrs. Abernathy visited regularly, bringing baby clothes she had sewn, and practical advice gleaned from decades of observing young mothers. The wives of neighboring ranchers appeared with casseroles and offers of assistance. Even Judge Potter's wife sent a beautifully crafted cradle that had belonged to their own children. "See, Hayes said one evening as they sorted through the latest gifts. "This is what I tried to tell you when you first came to Wichita. Out here, we look after each other." Sarah nodded. Thinking back to that desperate morning when she had stood alone on the street with nothing but the clothes on her back. "I couldn't see it then," she admitted. "I couldn't believe that people would help without wanting something in return." "And now?" Hayes asked, his expression tender. "Now I understand that giving without expectation is the greatest gift of all," Sarah said softly. "It's what you did for me, Hayes. You gave me everything without asking why I needed it." "Best decision I ever made," he replied, leaning over to kiss her gently. Their son, William Hayes Nicholson, was born on a perfect September day, with Mrs. Abernathy serving as midwife, and Henry pacing nervously outside, like an expectant father himself. The baby had Hayes's blue eyes and a dusting of Sarah's auburn hair, a perfect blend of both parents. "He's beautiful," Hayes whispered, cradling his son with careful hands that were more accustomed to breaking horses than holding infants. "Perfect in every way." Sarah watched them together, her heart so full it felt it might burst. From the depths of despair, she had found her way to this moment of pure joy. The path hadn't been straight or easy, but every step had led her here, to this family that was now hers. As William grew, so did the Triple N. Hayes' sound management and Henry's innovative ideas for breeding stronger, hardier cattle began to pay dividends. They were able to hire more hands, purchase adjacent land when it became available, and even send Henry to agricultural college in Kansas City for a year to learn the latest scientific methods of ranching. Sarah's role expanded beyond the household as she took over the ranch's bookkeeping and correspondence, freeing Hayes to focus on the practical aspects of running the operation. Her education, once considered superfluous by her stepfather, proved invaluable as the business grew more complex. 3 years after William's birth, their daughter Elizabeth joined the family, followed 2 years later by twins James and Robert. The small house expanded along with their family, with new rooms added and the original structure reinforced and improved until it was barely recognizable as the bachelor's cottage Hayes had once described. Through it all, the silver bracelet remained on Sarah's wrist, accumulating charms that marked the milestones of their life, together a tiny cradle for each child. A miniature book when Sarah established the first lending library in the county, a small silver steer when the Triple N won top honors at the state fair. Life wasn't always easy. There were droughts that threatened the herd, illnesses that kept Sarah awake for nights on end as she tended feverish children, and the normal disagreements that arise between two strong-willed people building a life together. But beneath it all ran the steady current of love and respect that had formed the foundation of their marriage from the beginning. 10 years after Sarah had arrived in Wichita with nothing, she stood on the porch of their home, no longer small, but a substantial ranch house befitting the successful operation the Triple N had become, watching Hayes teach 7-year-old William to rope a fence post. Elizabeth sat nearby, solemnly braiding her doll's hair, while the 4-year-old twins chased each other in endless circles around the yard. "Penny for your thoughts," said Henry, joining her on the porch. Now, 35, he had grown into a respected rancher in his own right, finally married to the school teacher who had resisted his charm for nearly 3 years before succumbing. "I was just thinking how different my life might have been," Sarah replied honestly. "If Hayes hadn't stopped that morning, if he hadn't offered help without questions." Henry nodded, understanding. "My brother always could see the heart of things. He knew a good investment when he saw one." He winked at her, taking the sting from words that might otherwise have sounded calculating. "Though I don't think even he realized just how much return he'd get on that particular kindness." Sarah laughed, knowing it was true. The frightened, desperate young woman she had been could never have imagined the life she now lived, not just comfortable and secure, but rich in love, purpose, and connection. "Sarah," Hayes called from the yard, "come see what your son just did." She descended the steps, moving toward her family with the confident stride of a woman who knew exactly where she belonged. As she reached Hayes' side, he slipped an arm around her waist, his touch as natural as breathing after all these years. "Watch this," he said proudly as William demonstrated his newly acquired roping skills, his small face screwed up in concentration. "Very impressive," Sarah praised when the loop settled around the post. causing William to beam with pride. "Just like his pa," Hayes said, ruffling the boy's hair affectionately. Later that night, after the children were asleep and the house had settled into peaceful quiet, Sarah and Hayes sat together on the porch swing, a ritual they had maintained throughout their marriage. The prairie stretched before them, silvered by moonlight, the occasional lowing of cattle in the distance the only sound breaking the stillness. "I got a letter today," Sarah said, her head resting comfortably on Hayes' shoulder. "From back east." Hayes' arm tightened slightly around her. "Your stepfather?" Sarah shook her head. "No. Viola died last winter, did you know? Jeremiah remarried again, a widow from the next county. The letter was from Mrs. Patterson, my mother's old friend. She wrote to tell me that Jeremiah had a stroke. He's asking for me." Hayes was silent for a moment, absorbing this information. "Do you want to go?" It was the question Sarah had been asking herself all day. "I don't know," she admitted. "Part of me says he doesn't deserve my forgiveness after what he did, but another part remembers the man who was kind to me when my mother was alive, who taught me to ride and bought me books when I was little." "People are complicated," Hayes said thoughtfully. "Your stepfather did wrong by you, no question, but holding on to that anger only hurts you in the end." Sarah nodded against his shoulder. "That's what I've been thinking, and the children should know where I came from, see the town where I grew up." "Then we'll go," Hayes said simply. "All of us, as a family. You can make your peace, whatever form that takes, and show those people exactly who Sarah Lawson Nicholson has become." The certainty in his voice warmed her. After all these years, Hayes still understood her needs sometimes, before she fully recognized them herself. "I love you," she said softly, "for everything you are and everything you've helped me become." Hayes turned to look at her, his face illuminated by the soft glow spilling from the house windows. Despite the lines etched by years of sun and weather, his eyes were the same clear blue that had first captured her attention on that desperate morning long ago. "I love you too, Sarah, more than I could possibly say." He kissed her gently, then added with a smile, "Best thing I ever did was stop for that sad-looking young woman standing alone on Main Street." Sarah laughed, the sound rising clear and joyful into the Kansas night. "Best thing that ever happened to me was having a cowboy who gave me everything without asking why." They sat together in comfortable silence as the moon continued its arc across the vast prairie sky. Two people who had found in each other not just love, but home in its truest sense. From nothing, they had built everything, one day, one challenge, one joy at a time. And as the stars wheeled overhead, bearing silent witness to the life they had created together, Sarah knew with absolute certainty that no matter what the future held, they would face it as they had faced everything else together, with courage, compassion, and an unwavering belief in each other. For Sarah Lawson Nicholson, once a girl with nothing but the clothes on her back and a heart full of fear, had discovered the most precious truth of all. Sometimes the greatest journeys begin with a single act of kindness, offered freely by a stranger who sees not what you lack, but all you might become.